Hello, I'm Dr. Bond. This is Bond Report BAFA 13. What is a KOL? And I want to ask you, this is an introduction to this interesting topic. What is a KOL? You know, is it these things? Kinky old loser, killjoy, overbearing louse, and here's a list of things for the reader to peruse at leisure. But a KOL in ophthalmology, we get a lot of speakers from this. The initialism KOL is disputed by some leaders in the field. The general consensus to be know-it-all, knucklehead, kibitzing, out and out, obdurate, obnoxious, outlandish, obsolete, oppressive, loser, liar, litigant, long-winded liar, lame ass, pick your poison. And so we're going to define a KOL. Now, actually, what they mean by that is that's a definition from what we call industry. When you talk to they call themselves industry. You see them at meetings and they're selling equipment and selling concepts. Although they call themselves industry, they never seem particularly industrious, but industry. They get a guy for their speaker who suddenly knows everything, and they funnel all their knowledge through that guy who yesterday was just a guy and today knows everything. And so let's define some business terms here for the guys who give lectures or for general business. What is a consultant? A consultant is a guy who owns a briefcase. Everybody knows that. What's an expert? An expert is a guy that lives at least 100 miles away and owns at least one book you don't. This has got a pretty good chance of being the book the expert owns, because a lot of them are very good at that. Now, maybe he wrote it. There's a story that I like that I'm going to just digress. Henry David Thoreau here, as we talk about, has at least one book you don't, wrote a book of his essays, poems, verse, and he was sure it was going to be a big bestseller. And so he told the publisher that he wanted to do a run of 1,000 copies. The publisher said he wasn't going to do that. And Henry David finally said, listen, he would guarantee this with his own funds. If the publisher made a run of 1,000, that he'd pay retail for all of them. The publisher agreed to that deal. They sold 8. And Henry David bought 992 copies of the book he wrote from the publisher. And I've always thought of him as kind of a humorless dude, but he wasn't. He wrote a letter to a friend of his saying, you'll now be glad to know that I've got a library of over 1,000 volumes, over 900 of which I wrote myself, which I found kind of charming and thought, people who can appreciate a joke on themselves are seldom real assholes. And now we can see, as we try to get a makeup of a KOL, a key opinion leader, you can see that the expert has at least distance. It seems to be a key factor. He's got to live at least 100 miles away. So, therefore, distance is a key factor in the making of a KOL. Now, is this a relative distance? Well, this gets more. Is this a square of a distance? As you study this, the further away seems to be the smarter. As you do a graph of this, the more further away your expert comes from, the factor distance, smartitude, and distance seem to increase together. The more distance, the more the smartitude, to coin a phrase. English is a wonderful language, but needs a little work, and occasionally you have to coin this. For instance, I propose an English language thing like the French have, where you can take words that have become meaningless, like 20 years ago when all the teenagers said like something, or take a word like awesome and club it mercilessly out of existence and have that over with. There needs to be something like that. So we offer smartitude for your own, as a hopeful, what the Darwin guys had called a hopeful monster, getting born all at once. Jesus Christ said that a prophet is not without honor except in his native place and among his own kin. Here is more from the Gospel of Mark about proof that distance is closely related to expertise. The further away you go, the smarter you are. So therefore, you have a distance factor. The more famous the KOL is, this effect seems to hold true. Very few ophthalmologists in town that practice in the same town he is, you'll be at a meeting and you'll mention, this guy. Nobody in that town will have anything good to say about him. They're positively eager to regale you with tales of his errors, cover-ups, complications, trouble, general shortcomings, bad character. And so once again, you see your graph And here is your fame and renown. And it goes up. The negative things you hear from people in your region goes up the more famous you become. And this seems to be a straight line graph, not a square or anything, but that seems to be a universal law as far as I've seen. Now, if you want to be, just as a kind of an exercise in human nature, if you want to be inundated by tales of the given KOL's glaring shortcomings, call him or her a genius in the hearing of one of these guys that's going to straighten that out. And doing that is actually like having a piñata filled with something and trying to whack it, hit a hornet's nest with a stick, have Pandora's box as a piñata and you're hitting it rather than opening it. I mean, pick your poison here. But if you want to, I want to like the piñata illustration. If you want to be inundated of tales of this guy's assholery, simply call him a genius in the presence of these people. Now, Joe Theismann is broadcasting a game, and here's Bill Walsh called a genius. And I'm listening to this game. I don't remember why Washington, but he said Bill Walsh had been called a genius, the West Coast offense. Nobody, he said, in football should be called a genius. A genius is a guy like Norman Einstein. You can't make this up. And so there's Joe and there's Norman Einstein. People say, Charles Portis said it the best, writing True Grit and those books that are made in movies. People say wild shit if you listen to them. And so it's, the listener does this. Now, this KOL can be the smartest guy in the world, but his audience is his local guy. So here's Oscar Wilde talking about the play was a great success, but the audience was a disaster. We've all seen these. They'll talk, and these guys that you're hearing talk about the KOL will talk about their vast experience, where that experience is the name men give to their mistakes. And that's kind of true. Also, anyone who lives within their means, they're going off of what they did yesterday, suffers from a lack of imagination. This is my own personal little take on that. But, you know, people, they want to straighten this out. Now, this is an actual letter. Howard Hughes was living on top of the Desert Inn, had occupied the top floor of the Desert Inn. They're starting to give him a hard time. He's getting more and more just angry at the world as they do that. And so he read an article in the Las Vegas paper, and he wrote a letter back to them. I'm quoting from. He says, I read in your rag newspaper that I am a deranged, paranoid millionaire. And he said, I am not a deranged, paranoid millionaire, damn it. I am a billionaire. So straighten that out. He bought the Desert Inn. After that, did some other things. Once again, you couldn't open your mouth without subtracting from the sum of human knowledge. Now, I will say this with KOLs. Whatever company they're speaking more for and the equipment they have developed the sundial theory, what I like to call the sundial theory of surgical statistics, meaning you count no outcomes except the sunny ones. This is what I would call the sundial theory. This is my own coinage. And I think that develops usually they're getting paid by people. You will also have the audience full of people, perhaps even many people confuse their opinions with knowledge. And the somewhat remarkable corollary with that the more strongly held the opinion, the deeper and more profound the knowledge is felt to be, which anyone can dispute. Also, Charles Van Loan. This is the average KOL. You've done several thousand of this, and they've done 3 or 4. But they are competent to give you advice, no matter how few of these things you've done. And this is chat lines, this is everything. And it applies to golf, but this is a more universal application than golf, as any surgeon knows. But in terms of you just do Julia Child thing. You just stand there and say your piece, and everything will be marvelous. In statements unreliable, uncheckable, and nebulous, other than being a model of a modern major general, you are the very model of a condescending KOL, which has the right rhythm. And you develop your arts of condescension. Thank you very much. Please subscribe.